The following brands have in one way or another contributed to this video. Hey everyone, my name is Max, welcome to my channel, and in this video we're going to talk about using virtual instruments and virtual effects to make real music. A couple of months ago, Glenn Fricker of Spectre Sound Studios invited me to participate in the Tone Wars challenge. Some of you might have already watched it. And the idea behind it was to use the free Ignite Emissary plugin together with Lancaster audio impulse responses to achieve the best possible sound. And the moment I heard about the concept, I knew exactly what track I was going to use for that. Well, if you watch my channel, then you know that I'm not really a metal guy, and the reason I already had that track composed is because it was written specifically for the detailed video on this guitar, the Harley Benton Dullahan headless guitar. The video is not published yet because I'm still working on it, but if you are subscribed to this channel and hit the bell button, you'll get a notification as soon as it goes public. And so, because the track was initially recorded using this guitar and composed specifically for this guitar, it totally deserved the right to be in the video for the Tone Wars challenge. But I have to admit, I didn't expect this guitar to become one of the most controversial topics discussed in the comments under Glenn's video. Just like any other Harley Benton guitar, you'll find this one at Thomann, and I'd really appreciate if you check the link below, because the more people click it, the more support this channel gets. But let's take a look at the track, shall we? Alright, here it is. You see the highlighted part here? That's the part of the track that actually ended up in the video. And I had to trim the rest of the track because we had a time frame to fit the track into. But don't worry, you will hear the full version in the detailed video on Dullahan. So usually it works like this. When I have an idea, I would just grab a guitar, plug it right into an amp, and record the idea with a click track, like this. So initially there was nothing, no drums, no arrangement, just guitars and a click track. And lately I tend to use this amp here, the Hughes&Kettner Black Spirit 200, more often than any other amp. Technically it's not a tube amp, but for some reason it tends to sound very good in the mix, and for the initial idea of this track I just went like to the Ultra channel. I didn't even know what the settings were because I never touched them. It just sounds good right out of the box. But for the challenge, I was supposed to use the plugin, not the real amp. So the question here is, how do you record the dry sound of your guitar? I've tried several different methods, and in my scenario, the simplest and the most reliable one was to go right into the DI input of the preamp, which is a part of my audio interface. This input is specifically designed to take instruments like guitar. Here's the thing though, when I play through a real amp, there is no latency, I can hear my playing right away. In this case, I had to monitor myself through the computer, through the plugin, with latency, and that was the most annoying, I would say, part of this. Even though I was able to bring the latency down as much as possible, a tiny fraction of it still was there. Playing guitar and monitoring myself with a delay, even a tiny one, was anything but fun, definitely required some getting used to. I actually tried to use a splitter before the audio interface and use the second signal chain to monitor myself through a real amp, but that introduced some additional noise, probably because of a ground loop or something like that, and I had to abandon that idea. Okay, I found the way to record guitars, and here's what it sounds like without plugins. Nice and clean, and with plugins, heavy and aggressive. We'll get into details a little later, because before recording, re-recording guitars, I actually needed drums, and I have a tool that is just perfect for that. That is the Superior Drummer 3. I've been using this for quite some time now for different projects in different styles, and it sounds good, it's easy to tweak, and it comes with tons of pre-programmed patterns. So most of the times, I don't even need to program drums. I would just take a pattern from a library and tweak it a little bit to fit the song. That really speeds up my workflow. And I also like the idea that the whole mixing is happening right inside of the plugin, which keeps my main DAW mixer neat and clean. For this particular song, I used a preset that I programmed a couple of months ago for another project. It sounds like this. For the bass sound, I've used this bass, and I probably haven't changed strings on it for a couple of years or so, and that actually happened to be the only instrument in this song recorded through an actual physical preamp and not a simulation. Usually for the recordings I would use this 2-nose Lee-Bass preamp and record from the DI output right into the audio interface. And then it goes into the Torpedo Wall of Sound plugin for the cabinet simulation. You can actually grab a copy of this at 2Note's site for free, and it already includes some cabinets. So here's what it sounds like dry without the plugin. And now with the plugin. It kind of sounds more aggressive. And now with drums. Bass is extremely important, and in the final mix it may actually be even louder than guitars. I also prefer a bright and aggressive sound of the bass, and therefore, and also to compensate for old strings, you can see that I'm pretty heavy here on the high end of the exciter, and there's also a high mids boost on the EQ. Okay, slowly but surely we're getting to guitars. Let's see what we have here. So there's a noise gate, the amp, and the cabinet simulation. Here are the actual settings for the amp. It's on the dirty channel. The bright switch is enabled, yeah, and the deep switch as well, and the shape, so all 3 switches are up. What else? Low mid boost. The gain is pretty high, actually. I think when I recorded the track it was lower, and I didn't change anything here on the back, everything as it was in stock. And for the cabinet simulation, I've got Glenn Fricker's Eagle Fredman impulse response from the Lancaster audio library. Okay, and here's what it sounds like. With drums and bass. And by the way, I'm using only one instance of the plugin, which is on the group track right here, and some EQ to smoothen that high end a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at the lead guitar. Here we have the amp, the cabinet simulation, and some delay, and there's also some EQ here to make it more mid-oriented. Alright, here are the amp settings, and it has much more mids than the rhythm track. I also used another impulse on this one, Eagle Off Axis 57. Alright, here's what it sounds like alone. And now with the rest. So, slowly but surely it sounds more like a completed track, but a couple of things are still missing. The first one is the clean guitar, which is here. And at the end. Here's what we have on the clean guitar channel: an overdrive, an amp, the cabinet simulation, I think that's a compression, and a spring reverb from Arturia, which sounds absolutely fantastic. The amp settings for this one are the clean channel, the gain is at minimum, the shape switch is down, and the EQ knobs are pretty much around 12 o'clock. The impulse response I've used for this one is the same as for the lead track Eagle on Axis 57. This was the very first time that I used this particular reverb, and I'm very happy with what it sounds like, so I'll definitely be using it in my future recordings. As for the clean channel of the amp, I didn't like it at all. It was kind of boring and flat and wouldn't give me any compression whatsoever. Therefore, well, I had to use an overdrive. Here's what it sounds like without it. And now with it. Alright, now for the complete picture I also wanted to have some synths. I believe that sometimes synths may sound even more evil, more aggressive and more metal than guitars. Therefore, if I actually do metal, I really want synths in it. Okay, here's the first one. It is the Arturia Pigments, and I think I just used some stock preset. It sounds like this. Now together with drums and bass. And with guitars. Now check what it sounds like without it. Something's missing, right? Now that sounds right. Okay, and it also comes back at the end. Together with bass and drums. And with guitars. Now without it, that would be like... something's missing, right? The second synth is another instance of Arturia Pigments with another stock preset that sounds like this. And at the end, so it is a percussive thingy of some sort that is happening in the background. With bass and drums it sounds like this. And at the end. And last but not least, the ARP 2600, which is my favorite synth because that's actually the only one that I know how to tweak from the beginning to the end. And again, that was another stock preset that I modified a little bit. A source synth of some sort. And in the mix, well, not in the mix, alone it sounds like this. Sounds like a static noise. Let's check it with bass and drums. And now with the guitars. It isn't very loud in the mix, but it is there, and without it, it would sound empty in a way. I have already mentioned that the bass is extremely important, and it is very loud in the mix. Now let me show you what it's gonna sound like without it. That's a huge difference. When it comes to mixing, I prefer to have 2 or 3 reference tracks which sound appropriate in the given style of music. I listen very carefully to each element: drums, bass sound, guitar sound, the room, how it is all EQ'd and stuff like that. And I would try to bring instruments in my mix to the same quality level. It doesn't need to sound exactly the same, but it shouldn't sound worse, that's the point. I could also do that without a reference track, but then there's a danger that the mix may sound too dark or too harsh. And even though it may sound okay-ish on its own, as soon as you compare it to quality recordings, you will immediately hear the difference. And usually that difference won't be in your favor unless you're very experienced in mixing. This time I used a couple of tracks from Clayton, also known as Cell Dweller, as my reference tracks, because I'm a huge fan, and this guy knows very well how to make metal even without any guitars at all. Okay, so here's what my mixer looks like. I've got drums here, bass, 3 synths, clean guitar, rhythm guitars, and lead. But half of the magic is happening here in the iZotope Ozone plugin, which is on the master track. And here I have some EQ, dynamics, imager, which makes everything sound a little bit wider, vintage tape for saturation, and the master limiter. So here's what it sounds like without it, and with it. And that's it pretty much. And that is how I created the track called Outside the Limits, Well, I'm not an expert in mixing, but if you like this little tutorial here, find it useful and would like to watch some more content like this, let me know in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. Wow, you've made it to the end of this video, and I'm very happy about that, because first I can say thanks, and second, not many people make it this far. It would be really great to hear back from you in the comments below, not necessarily about the topic of the video, but just, to say hi, for example. If for some reason you like what I do here on this channel and want to support me, there's Patreon, I'll give you a link to that in the description below, and other than that, subscribe or don't subscribe, whatever you feel like. That's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video someday soon.